Dumelang. Welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. It's great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, has the United Nations failed in its mandate to maintain peace and protect international humanitarian law? That's their mandate. But has it done this effectively in Gaza and previously in other conflicts? And if not, what kind of changes are necessary? How do we make this multilateral institution that we all need to work for all of us? Is it even possible for us to dismantle the system of allyship in the United Nations, where countries end up backing each other, using their veto powers, not on principle, but because they're big brothers? We're live in New York tonight with Richard Gowan, who is a United Nations analyst, as the United Nations General Assembly prepares to vote on whether to accept Palestine as a full United Nations member. And then later, crime has reached crisis levels in this country. Communities are under siege. People are no longer feeling safe in their homes, at schools, at church, at work, at the mall. Criminals are also becoming more and more brazen, and South Africans are looking towards the police to protect them. But how do they do that when they have capacity and financial constraints? How do they do that when there's a trust deficit with the citizens? How do they do that when societies themselves are not actively involved in helping police fight crime? Well, the Police Minister Bheki Cele joins us this evening to discuss the SAPS's efforts to combat crime. Let's face the nation tonight. But first, my comment. So the United Nations Security Council is this evening voting on a draft resolution recommending Palestine to become a full United Nations member state. Now, as things stand, Palestine has permanent observer status at the United Nations. Palestine has stated their case why they believe they must be accepted for full membership.
How could this recognition and this membership harm international peace and security? This question, ladies and gentlemen, we ask it specifically to the United States and other countries that oppose granting the State of Palestine full membership at a time when they recognize Israel, which is the other party in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and has granted Israel full membership at the United Nations. And to those who say that recognizing the Palestinian state must happen through negotiations and not through a UN resolution, we wonder, once again, how was the State of Israel established? How was it recognized? Wasn't that through a UN resolution, which is Resolution 181?
Well, Israel, on the other hand, has objected to this, questioning the principles of the United Nations.
Your eyes will remain on Gaza as the rest of the world burns. And this is precisely what is happening today. You sit here focused, again, on Israel, focused on Gaza. We will hear talk of international law, human rights, and many other terms this council loves to toss around. But in reality, this council as a council cares nothing about human rights or international law. You even refused to visit our communities in southern Israel, and I invited all of you, that were devastated by Hamas. Everything is political and distorted.
So we'll find out this evening if the General Assembly will vote for or against this draft resolution. It can admit a new member state with a 2/3 majority vote, but only after the Security Council gives its recommendations. And we know the dynamics in the Security Council and the veto powers afforded to some countries. So let's look at the role of the United Nations during wars and conflicts, because it has a role to play in maintaining peace and protecting international humanitarian law. But has it done this effectively in Gaza? Has it done it in previous conflicts? Just recently, the United Nations Security Council, for the very first time, adopted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, which many people agreed was quite significant. That ceasefire also called for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and the urgent need to expand the flow of aid into Gaza. But as significant as this development is, or was, there were doubts, and I think rightly so, about whether this would be enforced, because other resolutions have been ignored in the past. In fact, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres this evening once again made that appeal for retaliations to stop.
It is high time to end the bloody cycle of retaliation. It is high time to stop.
But will the affected parties listen? That's the question. Hamas, Israel, the other countries that are supporting either side. Because we've been here before where there's tough talk, but what difference does it make on the ground? How effective has the United Nations been as a multilateral organization when it comes to invasions, to occupations or wars? And I think it has failed in some instances in the past in maintaining peace and protecting humanitarian law, especially when it deals with world superpowers. How effective was their intervention in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Yemen? What about their intervention when Russia violated the United Nations principles of humanitarian and international law when they invaded Ukraine? Because Russia violated the UN Charter, where the territorial integrity of countries is a central tenet. And yes, the sanctions are there. Yes, there are condemnations, but that hasn't stopped the war, has it? So maybe we need to rethink how the United Nations operates and how it's structured. Yes, you don't have to give it too much power to the extent that it will undermine the sovereignty of countries, because that power will be abused by the superpowers who are members of the states and donate billions to organizations. But it needs some teeth. I mean, after World War II, which was the largest and deadliest conflict in human history, the United Nations was created as a peacekeeping force because there was a realization that we need to find other ways to resolve conflict. But how effective has it been when dealing with powerful countries? And I think it has partly failed. So how do we make this multilateral institution that we all need, we need it to work? How do we make it to work for all of us? How do we dismantle that system of allyship in the institution? Because there are countries that end up backing each other, not on the basis of principle, but because they're big brothers, they're allies. The so-called P5, US, China, Russia, France, the UK, they can veto anything. Sometimes they support their friends, and they're not prepared to give up their veto powers. Some of them are not even members of the International Criminal Court, so they won't take responsibility for abuses in their own countries. So the question I'm asking tonight is, what is your assessment of the United Nations performance in promoting peace and safeguarding human rights in conflict zones? You can send us a 30-second WhatsApp voice note right now on 078-459-1897. Remember to tell us your name and your surname and where you're sending the voice note from. Alternatively, you can send us an X on Face the Nation SABC. After the break, Richard Gowan joins us to discuss that vote in the United Nations Security Council and the necessary restructuring of the United Nations. Stay with us here on Face the Nation.
The full view, where accuracy meets fearlessness in every report.
We're committed to going beyond the headlines, ensuring you get the complete picture.
From breaking news to uncovering the truth, while holding those in power to account.
Navigate the terrain of local and international sports,
while keeping you abreast with real-time weather updates.
So, get a comprehensive look of the world around you.
Trust us to give you
the full view.
Do you know how, why, when?
The elections will be held this year on the 29th of May.
And where? Join the Full View team on SABC News for everything you need to know about participating in the 2024 national and provincial elections. Every Wednesday evening, we'll provide you with all the information you need about the voting process so that you can be an active and informed citizen. SABC News, independent, impartial.
Welcome back. Now, the United Nations Security Council is set to vote on a Palestinian bid for full UN membership. Various countries have this evening spoken for and against this move, but as the issue is being debated, so is the role of the United Nations in maintaining peace and protecting human rights during conflicts. What is the United Nations track record in this regard, and what changes are necessary for this institution to work for everyone? Richard Gowan is a United Nations analyst who oversees the crisis group's advocacy work at the institution. He liaises with diplomats and United Nations officials in New York, and he joins us via Zoom this evening on Face the Nation. Richard, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening to you. Welcome to Face the Nation. I want to start off by asking you the question we are posing on the show tonight. How do you think the United Nations has fared in the maintenance of peace and the protection of human rights in conflict zones? What's their track record?
Well, the United Nations has always had failures and successes. And if we look back over the history of the organization, we have to remember that it failed horribly in cases such as Rwanda during the genocide exactly 30 years ago. But if you also look back over the history of the UN, you can identify many places, such as Liberia or further back Namibia, where the UN did play a successful peacekeeping role and did manage to slowly but surely bring a close to conflict. The UN was an important platform for the fight against apartheid, in South Africa. So this is an organization which has had important successes in the past. Mm-hmm. Equally, it is very obvious right now that with major power tensions rising, especially over Ukraine, and with the US blocking serious UN action over Gaza, that we are at a low moment for the World Organization. And I think we'll see that tonight, because the US will veto this proposal for Palestinian membership.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a moment. When you look at that track record of failures and successes, in your assessment right now, does it still serve all of us as it was intended to, especially when you look at the structure at the United Nations Security Council? Because sometimes it appears as though this institution hinges on the so-called P5, so the powerful countries, US, China, Russia, France, the UK, because they can veto anything.
Yes, this is a structure that is based on the balance of power in 1945, when the Second World War ended and the UN was founded. And almost all UN members, including the US, the UK and France, admit that this is now out of date and that there is a need for Security Council reform that would bring the institution into line with current power realities. However, there are really fierce political divisions over what that reform should look like. India, for example, wants a permanent seat. China is very opposed to India being another veto power from Asia in the Security Council. So we've been hearing a huge amount of talk about reform recently, but it is very hard to identify a political pathway to reform that would satisfy UN members.
So how can we then rethink how this institution operates in its structure? Because the feeling I'm getting here is there's no appetite from the powerful countries because they want to retain that power. So is it even possible for us to get to a point where the structure of the United Nations Security Council has completely changed?
I think it's going to be very, very hard to get structural change in the Security Council and in the UN system more generally. However, I do think that when the majority of UN member states line up, put pressure on powers like the US and China, saying We need to see changes in this organization. Washington and Beijing do hear that criticism. Officials in Washington in particular are very aware that they're suffering reputational harm over their positioning on Gaza. Now, they're not going to desert Israel overnight, but I do think that they want to find ways that they can show that they will be responsive to world opinion going forward.
Yeah. Let's look at the current crisis in the Middle East that the United Nations is dealing with. You may have seen now that Qatar is threatening to walk away as a mediator. That's how frustrated they are. But even Israel's own allies are so frustrated because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not listening to them. We are possibly on the verge of a wider regional war. And the UK, in fact, indicated just yesterday that Israel seems to have taken a decision that they will respond in their own way. When you look at even how the US has advised Israel to look at the possibility of a two-state solution, but Benjamin Netanyahu has come out to say that's not necessarily an option for them. Where does that leave the United Nations? Because what else then can be done if Israel itself is not even listening to its own allies, has even defied some of the resolutions of the United Nations? What next?
Well, this is a profound problem because Israelis, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was actually once the Israeli ambassador at the UN, believe the organization is fundamentally biased against them. And since October, it has been very clear that Israeli officials have decided to dismiss and belittle any criticism from any UN organ. So, Israel is really pitching itself against the UN as a whole. It's called on the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to resign because of his criticisms. So I'm afraid that, although there's been a huge amount of anger over the war at the UN, Israel is deliberately ignoring the messaging that it's getting from other nations at the UN. Now, the UN has an important humanitarian role, and it's still playing that role in the crisis, but its political role is limited.
Do you think there's ever going to be enough international pressure to get Israel to reconsider what it's doing in Gaza, or is it just simply untouchable?
Well, previous Israeli administrations have been more sensitive to ceasefire calls from the UN. I think the current Israeli government is especially negative towards the UN. But I'm afraid that I don't see the UN fundamentally shaping how this war plays out. I think that it will come down to the US to try and put more pressure on Israel to rein in its military campaign. When the war ends, the UN can have a very important role in reconstruction in Gaza, in providing basic services to the people of Gaza. The UN has a long history of doing that in the Middle East. But for now, it is politically marginal.
And we're going to be seeing what happens tonight. And after the break, that's what we're going to be looking at. The General Assembly voting on whether or not Palestine should be admitted and accepted as a full member. We'll discuss that with Richard when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. The question we are asking you tonight is whether you think the United Nations has done well in your own view. What's your assessment of the United Nations' performance in promoting peace and safeguarding human rights in conflict zones? There are some of you that have sent us your tweets. Let's look at some of them. Barry Martin says the United Nations is playing a crucial role in the performance and maintenance of peace, humanitarian, and protecting human rights in conflict zones. Olile says it's a useless body which I think needs to be closed. We have so many wars in the world, even now, but it looks like it does not have the necessary power to stop those. It's high time that we need to speak the truth to power. That's Olile from Kukuletu. Babako says the United Nations, they must ban veto vote and this permanent, non-permanent membership because it actually blocks the maintenance of peace and the protection due to some countries taken seriously than the others. Thank you so much for your tweets. I'm still in conversation with Richard Gowan, who oversees the crisis group's advocacy work at the United Nations. Richard, I want us to get into what is taking place tonight in the General Assembly. From what you have heard so far, the Palestine has put forward their case to say, this is why we think we must be admitted as a full member state. Israel has come out to give their own input, also questioning the principles and morality of the United Nations. What have you made of what the different countries have argued in the assembly tonight?
Well, I think that what we're hearing at the UN today is very predictable. It is clear that a majority of UN member states do support the idea that Palestine should become a full member of the organization, just like Paraguay or Peru. It should be fully admitted into the international community. However, what we also know is that you cannot become a UN member without a recommendation from the Security Council. And the US has made it very clear that it will almost certainly on its own veto the Palestinian application, because the US says that the Palestinians should only achieve full membership on the basis of negotiations with Israel. So a lot of this is theatre, frankly. Everyone is laying out positions that we know, but everyone also knows what the result is going to be because of the US veto.
What would it mean if the United Nations General Assembly doesn't vote as you expect, that the United States are going to veto this? Because even previously they've expressed their opposition to this kind of position. What would be the significance or lack thereof if in fact the decision is taken that Palestine is not accepted as a full member?
The Palestinians will argue that they have had a moral victory because they will be able to point to the fact that a huge majority of UN members have supported their application. And if they don't succeed at this moment, they will take this as a moral win, a win in terms of public relations. I think that the US will find itself very isolated. The US has really been isolated in most debates over this war since October. The US has absorbed a huge amount of reputational damage. As a result of this, it's affected its ability to push initiatives on other conflicts like Ukraine. But nonetheless, for the time being, the US is not going to desert Israel, and it will absorb this damage. I think in more broad terms, it will raise lots of questions about the veto. People are asking, why can Russia use its veto on Ukraine? Why can the US use its veto over Palestine? And that does damage the credibility of the organization, as we're discussing tonight.
So when you talk about the US never ever going to be abandoning Israel, we've seen a shift, Richard, in just the dynamics and the US approach to Israel. I mean, a couple of months ago, we started seeing the US really come out, call for ceasefire immediately. And later on, you start hearing the US speak to Israel about the need to consider that two-state solution. Just recently, after that Iranian attack, the United States indicated that we're not going to be involved in any counteroffensive. What does that tell us about the dynamics and the approach of the United Nations? Yes, it doesn't change their policy and friendship and allyship with Israel, but it sends a message, I imagine.
It does send a message, and it's clear that the Biden administration very much wants this war to stop and is very frustrated with the way that Netanyahu has pursued the war. Nonetheless, I think there's a difference between the US sending critical signals to Israel and the US actually breaking with Israel at the UN. And I think the general view in Washington is that the UN is not helpful over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think the US shares the Israeli view that the UN is very biased against Israel. So while the US does want the UN to continue to play a humanitarian role in getting aid into Gaza, it doesn't really want to allow the UN to have a major political role in the conflict. And so the US will continue to use its veto, even though I think the White House would very much like to see the war come to a rapid conclusion now.
Yeah. Well, they didn't use their veto the last time that the Security Council, adopted that resolution for an immediate ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, wasn't impressed with that, even though the US was trying to justify that and say, well, that doesn't mean our policy changes towards Israel. But how significant was that? And was that ever a sign that this is how they will be behaving in the Security Council going forward? Or was it just a one-moment thing?
So the US abstained on a resolution calling for a Ramadan ceasefire. And the fact that it abstained was intended as a political message to Israel. It was very small. The US said that this was a resolution they did not believe was legally binding. But they used their abstention to send a hint, if you like, to Israel that, America's patience with the war was running thin. But again, I think we have to distinguish between that sort of signaling and the US taking steps such as supporting Palestinian membership that would, really fundamentally infuriate the Israelis. So there are very clear limits to how far the US will go in the UN. In terms of challenging Israeli policy.
Okay, as we wrap up, I want you to help us answer one of the questions we got from our viewers who's asking about the significance of Palestine being a full member. What difference would that make on the current war in the Middle East?
Well, in practical terms, it might not make a huge difference, but I think that it would be a huge political win for the Palestinians, because for the first time they would be recognized as being at the same level as Israel. There's an asymmetry, if you like, between Israel as a full member of the UN and the Palestinians who do not have membership. I think that for the Palestinians, gaining membership would be an immense step towards dignity and recognition, and it would make them feel that they had finally achieved parity with the Israelis. Even if full UN members like Ukraine have discovered that the UN cannot give them guaranteed protection when they come under attack.
All right. Richard Gowan, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. He's the head of crisis groups lobbying work at the United Nations and analyst with the United Nations. After the break, we will look at some of your WhatsApp voice notes that you've been sending us, but also a conversation with the Police Minister Bheki Cele. Communities are feeling under siege because crime and criminals are becoming more and more brazen. So what is the SAPS's efforts in combating crime? The Police Minister faces the nation after the break.
In a nation where every voice matters, where democracy echoes through the hills and resonates in the city streets, one broadcaster stands out as the heartbeat of the nation. SABC News, the voice that echoes from the smallest villages to the grandest cities, connecting South Africans from all walks of life. We believe in being everywhere, in the heart of every community, ensuring that no story goes untold, no voice goes unheard. At SABC News, we understand the power of language. That's why we bring you hard-hitting election stories in all South African languages. The election season is upon us, and SABC News is your gateway to the political landscape. We bring you exclusive access to town halls, debates, and interviews with political leaders. We are everywhere you are. Stay tuned for the most comprehensive election coverage, because when it comes to news, we are South Africa's voice. SABC News, independent, impartial.
Welcome back. Police Minister Bheki Cele says efforts to revitalize the South African Police Service's Crime Intelligence Division are yielding results. In recent weeks, the SAPS has apprehended dangerous and armed gangs that have provoked widespread fear and panic. More than 20 would-be cash-in-transit thieves were apprehended in Witbank, Mpumalanga, thanks to the coordinated police and private security operations. The minister believes that tackling crime through decisive police action and strong community interaction will remain important to policing in the country, but criminality still remains rampant. The Minister joins us this evening on Face the Nation. Thank you so much for making time for us, Minister. Good evening.
Good evening to you and the viewership out there.
There are so many South Africans who are watching us this evening and they've had to probably lock their gates at 6 p.m., not because they want to, but because they're feeling unsafe. Unsafe in their homes, unsafe at church, unsafe at the schools when they are jogging. Do you understand when South Africans say we feel like the police are losing the fight against crime?
Unsafe in the middle of the night against their own family members, against their own fathers, brothers and all that, which is the most painful one. Indeed, South Africans have all the right to be scared and to be angry and raise their voices as they always do. Really, you understand. When you go out there and you listen to stories they tell, they are present but also brutal, these criminals. As I went to the place called Maran Hill, where there was that exchange of fire where the police won, one woman was telling the story. We had to stop that young woman was telling the story. We couldn't listen to it. So you think if you can't listen to it, just imagine what happened to her. Mm-hmm. Indeed, South Africans, they are. But there is a pushback from the South African police. We are really working, putting some methods, putting some issues, trying to push back. We can't give those. But also communities themselves coming on board, because most of the operations that we'll see where police are winning is because we get information and proper information that comes from the communities themselves.
Do you think South Africans are feeling safe under the protection of the SAPS as things stand now?
Some areas would be better than others. There are places where you go where South Africans have been really having it tough, and you'll go back there and they'll say to you, it's better than yesterday. There is a place called Kwamhlabelingana at Mango's. Situation was a hell there. But if you go there, people, they say, we have seen a lot of change and life is better. There are places like Kwamajola in Port St. John's, where was a funny situation that people, the women at night, will pack their kids on their backs and go and sleep in the bush, literally. But today they sleep in their houses. You find the young people playing the soccer and the sports and all those. There will be those areas. But we need to go there, concentrate on those areas. And indeed, there are places where they tell you that is a hell. Like when you go to Mthatha, I will be told that this is a hell. It's unequal, but there is a pushback, national pushback indeed. Maybe hence, we had to come with Operation Shanela on the 8th of May last year. We can give details. How far have we gone with that?
Yeah, and we'll look at some of the strategies you've implemented to fight crime. When we look at, just on average, I mean, more than 7,700 people were murdered in 3 months, according to the latest statistics. I think in the last briefing that you gave, that's an average of 84 murders every day. I mean, if you look at that indicator, that doesn't really give much hope and says to South Africans, you are safe.
Indeed. What makes one have a hope, even so, is that there were better days in terms of murder in South Africa. For instance, if you go to 2009, 2010, 2011, there would have been about 34 murders a day. Is a very high number. But that number has been almost doubled coming up now. So there were those methods and methodologies that were put and all that. That 84, as you calculate, is plateauing. We believe so. There is a lot of reconstruction that is supposed to have been brought back to the South African police. Let me give you the example. In the year 2010, when one was there, we had 195,000 members in the South African police, and with the 50 million South Africans. Today, there are 62 South Africans, and we had 187 police. We're 20,000 down than that. So Hence this recruitment that the president has instructed, 10,000 the year before last, 10,000 last year, 10,000 this year, because visibility is part of it. But specialization also is recruited from the basic training that other wings and units of the police must be better functioning.
I feel like, Minister, there was a failure to prepare even for the population growth. I mean, we know that the population grow, therefore, you're going to need more police officers. Was there a failure to plan properly to go and recruit more police officers? Because it's almost like we're on the back foot now. The population grows and we're trying to catch up, as opposed to vice versa.
Well, there are two things, but there will be both the duty of the government. I don't think that South African population grows as it planned. For instance, if you ask how many people that are foreign nationals, both illegal and legal, I don't think, maybe we might have the number for the legal ones, but I don't think we have the number for the illegal ones.
Which is a problem on its own.
Exactly, so is what I'm saying, that both are government problems. What department it doesn't count here is a problem on its own. But as you say, I think there was those that speak English, they say something called dropping the ball. I think there was dropping the ball in terms of planning the growth and equity of the safety structures, especially the warm bodies. I hear people, the experts, sometimes saying that it doesn't help to increase the number of the police. It does. Whoever sees the police, you behave better than you just go and see no police. But also when you go to these other countries, as you turn at the corner, there is a police standing there and all that. In South Africa, at the present moment, though we're correcting it, I think we'll be getting there soon, there are no numbers to make that vis-a-vis the population and all that. So indeed, the planning was not equaling the growth and the time that we're supposed to have done that, so that when this time comes, is availability of police and other law enforcement.
The problem is this dropping of the ball, Minister, actually cost lives. Because there was a dropping of the ball and we haven't had enough police officers, crime has increased, people have lost their loved ones, people have lost their property, they've lost their cars. So, and I wonder if there's ever consequence management in government when there's a dropping of the ball like that, where there are consequences, because those are very costly for people.
Well, indeed, there would be costly consequences, I fully agree. But the crux of the matter, as I speak now, there is a lot of reconstruction. I can give you that 30,000 that is culminating this year is part of the reconstruction. The bringing back of the experienced investigators, detectives, who have lost and bleeded the organization out is a part of it. The training of the POP, public order policing, that has been called by many other people like Judge Falam, like Professor Sindi, after the 21st, after 2021 things and all, they've been trained. Actually, last year alone, we trained 4,000 from the group of the police that were there.
But that training didn't start last year, right? Since the Falam Commission. The training for public order policing. Did it start last year?
There were no police to recruit from to train the public order policing. Yes, there would be. You will train people at the stations on the public order policing technique, but they would not come to form the unit. Now, the unit has been increased by 4,000 last year and the year before last. So that unit, I think at the present moment, has moved to 10,000. It was about 4,000 then.
When was it established?
It has been there for a very long time.
So immediately after the Falam Commission, soon after the training began and the unit was established?
Falam Commission, it was there, but it was allowed to decrease.
Okay.
Falam Commission was saying increase it so that it's both the tactic and the numbers that make POP work.
So the problem is not only about police visibility and not enough police officers. I mean, government hasn't also been building new police buildings. Why is that?
Yes, there are police stations that are new, that are built, to such an extent that because of no men personnel, you'll find that police that are there as they are now, are underpopulated themselves. At the shift of 6, you'll find that you've got 4 people and all that. So what would be use of increasing the police stations if you don't have a person power there? Persons make policing are not stations that are making policing, but we are building police stations. For instance, as this week and going, I'm opening 80 new police stations in the Republic of South Africa, and we have quite several of them that there is a groundwork and putting the new Western Cape, especially in Western Cape, Cape Flats and all that. We are building police stations. They might not be enough, but what we need to deal with more is a training of personnel.
Yeah. You have raised concerns in the past about capacity constraints, but also financial constraints. But sometimes when you look at, for instance, the budget for VIP protection versus the budget for combating crime, does it make sense that there's more spent, for instance, on VIP protection than to the Hawks to combat crime?
Well, I wonder where you get that. Because on the police, around the police, the smallest budget will be the protection. Would be for protection services, rather than other items like your administration, like your visible policing, which encompasses every other thing.
So about 3 billion rand for protection services.
Yes.
But when you look at the Hawks, that's about 2.2 billion rand.
Indeed. That has been going up. I agree that at the present moment it has been growing up, and itself it has shrunk quite badly, and many other units really shrunk. I don't want to go and have a blame game on the things and all that. They were reduced, including this when you removed the head there. Who was there and put almost a useless head. After that, shrunk. So we have put the money and the training and all that. That, at the present moment, is equal to the growth of the Hawks. Once they reach where they're supposed to be, remember, you don't just take anybody to go to Hawks. Those are the highly skilled people and all that, and there are a lot of them that are trained. And indeed, that money is growing according to the growth of the unit that was allowed to really shrink.
Yeah, but does it make sense that you would have VIP protection that continues to grow in its budget? I hear that the Hawks also needs to grow, but to spend 3.6 or so billion rand on protection services, that's a lot of money when we are dealing with crime. Some of that money could be given to even crime intelligence.
Well, the crime intelligence has the money. I'm saying on all units, maybe except the one that you have raised, which is Hawks, is the smallest one when it comes to the protection. Is the smallest one out of 105 billion. That would be the 3 billion that goes to the protection, and others. Unit, as I'm saying, the visible policing, the administration, including the crime intelligence and all that. And indeed, when it comes to Hawks, that will have to change, because as I speak, unfortunately, there are a lot of position on Hawks, and sometimes the money is not going too fast to fill those positions, because it's a very strenuous and a slow process. It's unlike going out there recruiting everybody and bringing in the police and training them 9 months and let them go. That is not the structure of the Hawks. You need to train them, send them out in high institution overseas and all that, recruiting from the other organization, qualified accountants and all those. It would not be easy sometimes to get those people coming, people from forensic and all that, but it's a highly specialized kind of environment that is not easy to get those skills to come and fill it quicker.
All right. After the break, we're going to continue this conversation with the Police Minister, Bheki Cele. Criminals are becoming more and more brazen. It's almost like they're undermining the men and women in blue. So how do they respond? And when they respond, as South Africans, do we criticize them and think they're trigger happy? I'll ask the police minister about that when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue our conversation with Police Minister Bheki Cele. And Minister, I want us to talk now about how brazen criminals are becoming. I mean, now when you look at how they even do cash in transit highs, they're doing it in broad daylight. They're not even wearing balaclavas anymore. What do you think is the reason behind that? Are they realizing the weaknesses perhaps in the SAPS, and that's why they feel so emboldened?
Maybe true. The structures that deal with that sophisticated criminality were, for some reason, were really pushed down. They were messed up. One of those structures is a crime intelligence. You remember that crime intelligence had a head that was suspended for 8 years, which means you could not bring the new person there when absolutely there was no head on it. And the structure, big time was missed. At a certain time was no inspector general of it. The structure is fixed now. There is a head, General Kumalo dealing with it, putting everybody where it's supposed to be. You can begin to feel the impact. Those cash heists that are happening, many of those guys, they are found on the planning stage. They are found on their bases, whether that is a booking and other places where there is Makado. You remember at Makado, that was a 90-minute shootout where the criminals, 19 of them perished and all that. Just Mpumalanga last week, so they were found there and all that. But there are other operations that tell you that the crime intelligence is beginning to take shape. Yeah,
I saw IPID indicating that the killing of suspected criminals is on the increase. And of course, this comes after there were 14 suspected criminals that were killed in KwaZulu-Natal, I think in Mpumalanga as well. How do you take a hard stance against the criminals while also being cautious so that you're not dealing with police that are trigger happy and they think they can just respond by firing arms?
I don't know. I don't want to blame your clan, the media. You know, when those 9 suspected criminals were killed in Tisai, I went there the next day. And there was almost a bus of journalists asking questions and all those kinds of things. That was Thursday. Friday, I buried a young police of 37 years who was killed by the criminals. Not a single journalist, not one. So you can see that people would know about the death of criminals, but they would not know about the police officer that is killed. In 3 months, from October last year to December, we lost 22 police in the Republic of South Africa, 22 that were shot and killed by criminals. Which means police, by the way, they are allowed by the law. When the criminals, they think they're tough, police can be tough. Of late, I think police have taken that stance. You saw what happened 2 days here in Gauteng, those house robbers and all that. You see, as I've spoken to Makado, there are other places, KZN and all that kind of thing. Because the crime intelligence will say, where we are going, those people are not coming with broomsticks and yellow dust. They are coming with the real stuff and all that. And when they exchange fire, police must understand, and there is only one language that you speak when the gun goes off, is to fight back. Police are invited, are called upon to act. Our job is to arrest. But if you force us to go tougher, for instance, again, at Mpumalanga, in Malahleni, there were 22 of those criminals. 5 were killed, 7 were arrested. If we were trigger happy, if police were trigger happy, they would not have arrested 8 of those. Everybody would have been shot. So if police, you resist and you come the other way, police will act as such, and if they are correct, otherwise will come and pick up the dead body. I've said to them, I'm prepared to stand and be accused if that happens, rather than coming to the crime scene to pick up the dead bodies of the South African Police Service members.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think was responsible, Minister, for the destruction of not only the SAPS, but the Hawks as well?
Well, maybe the whole cluster, because the cluster, even the prosecution, the magistracy, the correctional service, SARS and everybody, at a certain given time. Maybe this is a story for the other day. But I was there from 29 to 2011. I just invite you to go and look at the crime stats. What did they say? There was a time when South Africans say we can sleep with the doors open. So the structures were put, there were many structures, I don't have time to give, but one of the serious structures that was put there were TRT, which called Amaparet. And they're fighting crime. They were dismantled, other structures, the tracking team were dismantled and all that.
There were concerns that they were also terrorizing communities.
No, what you do, those that they do that, you put the IP, those that you do that, you investigate, those would be minute. Most of those guys were doing the good job in terms of response, that's why even today, I don't know who were saying they were terrorizing. Wherever you go today, people are asking, where is Amaparet? Where is TRT? That is a judgment from the communities themselves. That's why we are revitalizing them. That's why we are revitalizing all specialized units like the Special Task Force, NIU, and TRT, because they are able to respond to the blatant crime, that they're able to respond to those guys that they choose to shoot rather than be arrested and all that kind of stuff.
What do you say to South Africans watching out tonight who say there's a trust deficit? I don't trust the men and women in blue because sometimes I see how they interact with the criminals themselves. And it's not all of them, but there is a trust deficit that exists between the citizens and the police.
I like this statement to say not all of them. There are very good members of the South African police, and there are those that are bad. By the way, it's unfortunate that across the community there are bad people in church and all that. That's why there are many pastors that they are attending the courts and all that. Having said so, we have tried to work with the communities. I'm very happy that the structures are getting stronger, the CPF and all that. Hence, from the side of the government, we, even for the first time ever, we have budgeted the CPF 70 million this year. We're trying to grow so that they are able to move around to buy their own cars and all that thing. So when then the communities come on board and increase that trust issue, but the police doing work proper, things will be fine.
All right, Police Minister Bheki Cele, thank you so much for joining us on Face the Nation tonight.
Thank you very much.
And that's how we wrap up the Thursday edition of Face the Nation. We're back again on Tuesday between 8 and 9 p.m. Thanks for watching. Cheers.